The laugh came before the words did, which was how Lieutenant Colonel Gareth Stull operated. The contempt always arrived first, and the explanation followed as a formality. Crain, he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made the name sound like a mistake. You're standing in the wrong place. The evaluation range at Fort Hartwell stretched nearly 2 kilometers from the firing line to the far target arrays. And behind the line, 11 Rangers from the 75th Regiment stood in various postures of waiting, some with arms crossed, some with their hands on the back of their necks, all of them watching the woman in the Army combat medic patch who had walked down from the observer platform and was now standing at the empty position. Warrant Officer 2nd Class Simone Crain was 33 years old, 5'7", and wore her dark hair pulled back under her patrol cap the way she wore everything else, without excess, without performance. Her unit patch said 160th SOAR. She was flight crew. She was, by every definition that Lieutenant Colonel Stull recognized, not supposed to be here. I heard the brief, Crain said, about the sequence. The sequence is for qualified candidates, none of whom, Stull said, his voice carrying the patient, elaborately calm quality of a man explaining something to someone he has already decided cannot understand it, are flight medics. Brigadier General Pemberton had been standing behind the line for the better part of 4 hours. He was 60 years old, with the kind of face that had been rearranged by things most people only read about. 2 combat tours in Iraq, one in the Korangal, a classified advisory mission in eastern Syria that he was not under any circumstances permitted to describe to journalists or senators. He had lost people. He had written the letters. He had stood in cemeteries in full dress and rendered honors with the specific discipline of a man who understood that holding himself together was sometimes the only form of respect left to give. He was not a man who was easily impressed, and he was not a man who had patience for theater. He had been watching Simone Crain since she walked down from the platform. The morning had not gone the way anyone planned. The evaluation, a precision multi-target engagement sequence designed to qualify candidates for a new JSOC marksmanship integration program, required engaging 5 moving targets at distances ranging from 600 to 1,800 meters in sequence within 90 seconds. The conditions at the range were brutal. A shifting crosswind out of the southwest, temperature already touching 97 degrees by 10 in the morning, heat shimmer turning the far targets into suggestions of themselves. 11 Rangers had stepped to that line. 11 of them had finished the sequence with a confirmed miss, either on the 3rd or 4th target, where the wind correction compounded, and the distance pushed past what most precision shooters trained at regularly. 11 men, not one confirmed complete sequence. Pemberton had said nothing. He had stood with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the way his staff had learned to recognize from a distance, and he had watched. And now a flight medic was standing at the firing position and stating, not asking, exactly stating. What sequence did you run? Pemberton said. Not to Stull, to Crain. She turned to face him. Her expression was what someone would later describe to another person as serious, not cold, not aggressive, simply the face of someone who had stopped performing uncertainty a long time ago. 5 targets, sir. 600, 900, and a 200, 500, and 800 meters. Moving at variable rates. Sequential engagement, 90-second window. That's correct. And the rifle platform. M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle, standard issue to candidates. She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, processing. There was a difference, and Pemberton registered it. I'd like to use my own platform, sir, if I can retrieve it. Stull moved forward. General, I strongly suggest. Mr. Stull. Pemberton's voice was the same quiet register he used when he was done with a conversation. Thank you. Stull's mouth closed. Around the firing line, the 11 Rangers watched. It took Crain 9 minutes to walk to the vehicle lot and return. When she came back, she was carrying a case that had been somewhere. The kind of case that showed its history in the worn corners, the repaired latch, the discoloration along one edge that didn't come from any factory. She set it on the bench at the firing position and opened it the way she did everything, without ceremony, without announcement. Inside was a Seco TRG-42 chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum. The rifle had been modified over years. A custom trigger assembly, a suppressor she threaded into place with practiced hands, a scope that had been dialed and redialed across conditions that the elevation turret could have told a story about if you knew how to read it. Master Sergeant Tyrell Fenwick, senior among the Rangers, was standing close enough to see the setup. He'd been quiet for most of the morning, more quiet than most of the others, which was saying something, because the quiet after 11 consecutive misses had a particular texture to it. He looked at the rifle, then at Crain, then at the rifle again. "That's not a standard platform," he said. His voice was flat. He wasn't being hostile. He was stating a fact. "No," Crain said. "How long have you been running that setup?" She looked at him briefly. "Long enough." Fenwick held her gaze. He had the expression of a man who was recalibrating something, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly in the background, where the important calculations happened. He stepped back without another word. Crain settled into the firing position. For the first 2 minutes, she did nothing that looked like shooting. She lay still, her cheek near the stock but not yet against it, and she listened. She watched the wind indicators at the 600 and 100-meter marks. Pieces of engineer tape on stakes, ordinary as anything. She had a small notebook, spiral-bound, and she made notations in pencil. Windage estimates at 3 intermediate points along the range. Temperature correction. The time intervals between the target cycles, which she had memorized from the brief she wasn't officially supposed to have attended. Behind her, someone said something in a low voice. Another voice replied, quieter but not quiet enough. "She's doing the math before she runs the drill." No one laughed this time. She closed the notebook. She adjusted her position, elbows, body angle, the cant of the stock against her shoulder. She pressed her cheek properly to the rifle and settled her eye behind the scope. "Range is hot," the range officer said. "Sequence initiates on your ready." "Ready," Crain said. The first target appeared at 600 meters, crossing left to right. She fired. The sequence moved fast after that. The targets appeared in order, each one at a greater distance, each one moving at a rate slightly different from the last, each one requiring a correction she had already worked out on graph paper and pencil 10 minutes ago. The rifle moved and reacquired. Moved and reacquired. The suppressor absorbed most of the report, turning each shot into a heavy authoritative crack that rolled out across the range and returned as a diminished echo. The fifth target appeared at 1,800 meters. She fired. The range officer held the radio. Everyone heard it the moment the transmission came through. Sequence complete, 5 for 5, all impacts confirmed. The time on the range officer's stopwatch read 67 seconds. For approximately 4 seconds, no one moved. Then Fenwick said quietly, and with a completeness of conviction that didn't require volume, "What in God's name?" Pemberton stood absolutely still. His arms were still crossed. His expression had not changed in any way that a stranger would have been able to read, but something behind his eyes had shifted. The specific shift that happens when a man of experience encounters something that revises his understanding in real time. Not because he was wrong, but because the frame he'd been operating in was never large enough for this. Stoll said, "The target verification system needs to run the sequence again." The range officer looked up from the radio. "Sir, the system is functioning normally. 5 impacts confirmed by independent sensors. Run it again." "Mr. Stoll," Pemberton said, still without raising his voice, "we're done with that." Stoll's jaw tightened. He stood with his hands behind his back and his face arranged in the expression of a man constructing an alternate version of events, the version he would need later. In emails, in conversations with people above and below him in the chain of command. Crain had already risen from the firing position. She dusted the front of her uniform with one efficient motion and reached down for the rifle case. Her hands, for anyone close enough to observe, were steady. Pemberton crossed to her in 8 steps. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since she walked down from the platform, with the measuring quality of a man who assessed things for a living. But the quality had changed. "Warrant Officer Crain," he said. "How long?" She considered the question, not because the answer was hard to locate, because the full answer was not something that fit cleanly into a range debrief, with 11 Rangers standing close enough to hear it. 11 years, sir," she said, "since I was 22. Self-taught. The mathematics first, then the mechanics." Pemberton was quiet. He studied her face the way he'd studied the range. "You've done this in field conditions," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "Where?" The wind moved across the range. A flag at the range officer's station creaked on its mount. "Mali, sir," she said, in northern Chad. The words arrived in the air between them with weight. Pemberton absorbed them without shifting. He'd spent a career learning to absorb things. "In what official capacity?" "Flight medic, sir. MEDEVAC support for forward operating bases in the Sahel region." He looked at her steadily and unofficially. She met his eyes. "I did what needed to be done, sir." The quiet that followed was the kind that belongs to a man who is genuinely thinking, not performing thought. "There was an operation," he said slowly. "Second quarter 2021. A 12-man team, SOC advisors embedded with Malian counterterrorism forces, was ambushed at a river crossing in the Mopti region. 6 hours of contact. 4 contacts on the opposing side were removed in a 7-minute window from an elevated position to the east." He paused. No one on the team had secured that position. The team leader filed it as a friendly force action, unknown origin. It was never resolved. Crain said nothing. "My team," Pemberton said. "I was the senior advisor on the ground." The range was very quiet. 7 men came home from that crossing, sir," Crain said. Pemberton's expression moved, not by much, but enough. Something crossed it that was not quite grief and not quite recognition, but lived in the territory between them. 6 men came home, he said. His voice had dropped. Sergeant First Class Marcus Obi died of wounds at the field hospital in Bamako 8 days later. The words hit differently than anything else had that morning. Something moved across Crain's face, a small tightening around her eyes, the kind of thing that happened in a person who had been trained, by discipline and by necessity, to feel things in contained ways. "I know about Sergeant Obi," she said. Pemberton looked at her. "I followed all of them afterwards," she said. "All 7 I needed to know." A pause. "I always need to know." The silence that followed had a different quality. Behind the firing line, Fenwick had gone completely still. 2 of the younger Rangers exchanged a look and said nothing. Pemberton brought his right hand up to his cover. He held it there, a full, unhurried salute, rendered to a flight medic in a SOAR patch with a worn rifle case at her feet and range dust on her uniform. Warrant Officer Crain stood straight. She returned the salute. Her eyes did not drop. "Thank you, sir," she said. Stoll filed his complaint by 1700 hours. The paperwork cited an unauthorized weapon, a breach of the closed evaluation protocol, and a request for independent verification of all 5 sensor readings. He filed it with the installation's legal office and copied 3 people above him in the chain of command who he calculated would be sympathetic. He had not calculated Pemberton correctly. Fenwick found Crain at the SOAR detachment building the next morning. He knocked on the open door frame. She registered it as a form of courtesy. He came in and did not sit. Men who had spent their careers in uncomfortable places often didn't sit when they had something important to say. "I want to go on record at the legal review," he said. "Me and 2 of my guys. We were on that line. We saw the sequence." He paused. "I want to make sure whoever's reviewing this understands what 5 for 5 at wefting 800 meters in those conditions actually means, not as a number on a sensor readout, as a thing that is almost impossible." "You don't need to do that," Crain said. "I know I don't need to," Fenwick said, with a trace of impatience that was entirely genuine. "I want to. There's a difference." He paused. "You know that better than most." She held his gaze. Something shifted, not dramatically, but in the quiet, real way things shift when you understand that something you have been carrying alone is no longer entirely alone. "Thank you, Master Sergeant," she said. He was almost at the door when he turned back. 2 of my guys, the ones who were talking at the platform yesterday morning." He stopped. "They came to me this morning and asked if they could be considered for whatever program comes out of this." She nodded. He left. She sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and went back to the mission report she'd been drafting for 3 days. MEDEVAC coordination protocols, rotor wash calculations at high-altitude landing zones. Her official work, the work that had never stopped just because the other work was hard. The review convened the following morning in a conference room on the 2nd floor of the installation's legal building. Colonel Nessa Ford ran it, methodical, precise, the specific kind of thorough that came from 2 decades of applying the law exactly as written, no more and no less. She had no prior relationship with Stoll, which Pemberton had known when he made the call to have her assigned. The civilian in the third chair had not been introduced when he sat down. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, in a suit that was too carefully ordinary for Fort Hartwell, with the kind of face that certain kinds of powerful people cultivate deliberately, unremarkable by design. His name, Crain, learned when Ford addressed him directly, was Garza. Garza waited until Ford had worked through the procedural elements before he leaned forward and looked at Crain. "Warrant Officer Crain," he said, "no one in this room is questioning what you demonstrated on that range yesterday. Your skill is not in dispute." "Then what is in dispute?" Crain said. A beat. He hadn't expected the directness, the authorization structure under which you operated in the Sahel region. The nature of your activities there, those things require clarity. "I've been clear when asked by appropriate authority," she said. "I spoke to General Pemberton yesterday. I'll speak to any properly convened inquiry. This review," Garza said carefully, "may expand in scope." "That's fine," Crain said. She looked at him steadily. "I have nothing to hide. I have things I was prevented from making visible. Those are different." Something moved in Garza's expression, brief, controlled, but present. The expression of a man who has understood that the person across the table is not going to be managed. Ford's pen had not slowed. She was writing everything down. When Fenwick and his 2 rangers walked through the door with a formal testimony request, Stoll objected. Ford overruled him with a patience that was entirely practiced. Then the door opened again, and Pemberton's aide delivered a folder. Ford read the first page. Her pen stopped for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked up. "General Pemberton has submitted a declassification request for Warrant Officer Crain's operational record in Mali and Chad," she said evenly. "This includes mission logs, authorization chains, and confirmed engagement assessments." She paused. "He has also submitted a letter of commendation, countersigned by 2 additional flag officers." The silence had texture. Stoll's face had gone past tight. Garza was very still. Crain sat at the table with her hands flat in front of her and breathed. She had not known about the declassification request. Pemberton had not asked her permission. He had simply decided she deserved to be visible, and he had spent the morning making it happen. For the first time in longer than she could calculate, the variables were not in her hands. She found, sitting in that conference room at Fort Hartwell, that she could live with that. The call came at 0517 the following morning. "Private number." She answered it. "Warrant Officer Crain." The voice was female, older, carrying the specific gravity of someone who had spent decades operating at levels where tone was a precision instrument. "My name is Major General Irene Sauter. I believe you know who I am." Crain sat up in the dark. She did know. Everyone in the 160th knew Sauter. The way you know weather systems. Deputy Commanding General, Army Special Operations Command. The first woman to command a Tier 1 Special Operations support element in a combat theater. She was 61 years old and had a reputation for exactly 2 things: absolute precision and zero tolerance for institutional cowardice. "Yes, ma'am," Crain said. "I'll be brief. I've been aware of your file for 3 years. I became directly aware of it yesterday when Aldous Pemberton called me." A pause. "He told me about the sequence. He told me about the review. He told me about Garza." Another pause. "He also told me about the Mopti crossing in 2021, which I have my own perspective on, because I was the officer who approved the operational parameters for that mission." Crain went very still. "I want to be honest with you," Sauter said. "The authorization chain for your activities in the Sahel was deliberately constructed to be difficult to trace. I implemented that structure because I was asked to, and because I believed it protected the mission. I have had occasion to revisit that judgment." She stopped. "I would like to revisit it with you directly. I'll be at Fort Hartwell tomorrow at 0700. I'd like 2 hours of your time." "Ma'am," Crain said carefully, "what is the purpose of the meeting?" "Several purposes," Sauter said. "One is personal, one is institutional, and one concerns a decision being made in the next 72 hours about your operational record, the program Pemberton has proposed, and what the Army is going to officially say happened in Mali." A pause that felt deliberate. "And what the Army is going to say to the families of 2 people who were told their loved ones died in a training accident." She had known the families hadn't been told the correct version. She had not known, until SOAR told her the next morning, directly and without hedging, what they had actually been told. Training accident, non-combat incident during a MEDEVAC coordination exercise. Corporal Yusuf and Kemdi and Specialist Carmen Arcilla, 24 years old and 26. They had been in the vehicle that hit a secondary device at the river crossing. The device no one had detected because the intelligence on the route had been assessed at a confidence level that the officer who signed off on it had not actually verified. Training accident. Crain stood up when SOAR said the words. She walked to the window. She stood with her back to the general for 15 seconds. She was not going to lose her composure in this room. She was going to feel what she was feeling and then bring it back under control. Because losing control right now served no one, not herself, not SOAR, and not two people whose families had spent 4 years believing they died doing something routine and forgettable. She turned around. I will meet with whoever needs to be met with, she said, and I will put my name on whatever needs my name on it. SOAR nodded. She said nothing else, which was exactly right. Sergeant First Class Dev Arcilla found her at the SOAR detachment building at 1300 hours 2 days later. He'd been one of the rangers at the evaluation. He'd been in the group near the back that hadn't moved forward after the sequence, the group that hadn't gone to shake her hand. He stood in the doorway, the way young men stand when they've made a decision about something important and are working hard not to show how much it costs to make it. My sister was Carmen Arcilla, he said. The hallway went quiet. Crain held the door open. He came in. Fenwick followed. They sat. She did not wait for Dev Arcilla to find the formal version of something that was not a formal thing. She could see him looking for it. I know who you are, he said. Fenwick told me about the crossing, about what you did. He stopped. He looked at his hands, then back at her. My family was told it was a training accident. I know, Crain said. I found out 2 days ago. Something moved across his face. Surprise, and then something more complicated. You didn't know either. I knew the official record was wrong. I didn't know what they'd been told instead. He was quiet. My mother blamed herself. She'd been trying to get Carmen to transfer stateside for a year. She thought if she'd pushed harder. He stopped. His voice stayed steady. She could see that he'd decided that before he walked in. She thought it was random, an accident. She thought it didn't mean anything. Crain looked at him directly. She did not look away, and she did not soften what she was about to say, because she had learned a long time ago that plainly spoken truth was almost always kinder than the careful, padded version. Your sister was in the Mopti region because she chose to be there, she said. She was good at her job, and she was brave in ways that required both things simultaneously. What happened was not random. It was the consequence of a decision made above both of us that should have been made differently. She paused. Carmen deserved to have that said clearly to her family 4 years ago, and her family deserved to hear it. Dev Arcilla's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly, one small deliberate motion. There's a process beginning, Crain said. That may result in the official record being corrected. I can't make promises about timelines. What I can tell you is that I will do everything in my capacity to make sure your family gets the truth. He was quiet for a long moment then. That's not the only reason I came. He straightened slightly in the chair. I want to be in the program, he said, if it gets authorized. Fenwick told me you said the sequence is the last thing, that everything before it is what actually decides whether people come home. She looked at him, at the determination in his face, at the grief sitting quietly behind both things, the way grief does when you've been carrying it long enough to have made a functional peace with its weight. That's correct, she said. Then I want to learn it, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. When the program is authorized, she said, put in your application. He exhaled, a small sound that carried everything in it. He stood. He shook her hand properly, firmly. After he and Fenwick left, Crain sat alone in her office for a few minutes. The mission report on her desk was finished. The supply coordination request was filed. The formal review was pending. The meeting with SOAR was complete. Everything that could be done today had been done. She opened her personal notebook, not the ballistics notebook, a different one older, with a plain dark cover. She turned to a page near the back. 2 names were there in her handwriting, in ink that was 4 years old. Yusuf and Kemdi, Carmen Arcilla. She had written them the week she came home. She had not written anything else below them because there had been nothing adequate. Below Carmen Arcila's name, she wrote one line. She wrote it slowly, with the same precision she brought to every calculation that mattered. Their families will know the truth. She closed the notebook, she set the pen down, she sat in the quiet of her office and let herself feel the full weight of the past 4 days. Not to indulge it, not to perform it, but because feeling things accurately was also a form of precision, and she had never believed in cutting corners on anything that counted. Then she picked up the planning document for the new program and went back to work. The call from Maria and Kemdy came 6 days later, on a Tuesday morning, once the declassification had been processed and the families had been formally notified by Sauter's office. The number was a Virginia area code. Warrant Officer Crain. The voice was steady in the particular way that voices are steady when they have been built over a long grief. My name is Maria and Kemdy. Yusuf was my son. Crain closed her office door. She sat down. She held the phone with both hands. Yes, she said, I know. They told me it was a training accident, Maria and Kemdy said. For 4 years, I told people he died on a routine exercise. I held a memorial service at our church. She stopped. Her voice stayed even. He didn't die in an accident. No, Crain said, he didn't. Was he? The voice steadied again. Was he doing something that mattered? Crain closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Your son was doing something that required a level of courage most people cannot locate in themselves under any circumstances, she said. He was skilled, and he was effective, and the people around him knew it. What happened to him was the consequence of a decision made above all of us that should have been made differently. He deserved better. His family deserved the truth from the beginning. She paused. I'm sorry you were not told. I'm sorry I could not correct that sooner. Silence on the line. Long. Then Maria and Kemdy said, would you be willing to tell me more? When it's allowed, whatever you can. Yes, Crain said without hesitation. I'll tell you everything I'm permitted to tell you, and I'll advocate for everything else to be cleared. Thank you, Maria and Kemdy said. 2 words, 4 years of weight behind them. Crain received them the way she had received everything in the past week, directly, without deflecting, letting them land exactly where they were aimed. The call lasted 23 more minutes. 3 weeks later, Crain stood at the evaluation range at Fort Hartwell in the early morning. Before any other unit had signed in for the day, she had requested the range for 90 minutes. She came alone. She set up at the firing position the same way she always had: wind, temperature, the mathematics, the mechanics, the patience. She ran the sequence once. 5 targets, 63 seconds, 5 confirmed impacts. She packed the rifle. She closed the case. She stood at the firing line and looked out across the range at the 5 target stations, distant and still in the early light. She thought about Yusuf and Kemdy and Carmen Arcila. She thought about them the way she always did, clearly, fully, without looking away. Their faces, the particular quality of their professionalism, the specific injustice of what had been withheld from the people who loved them. Not praise, not medals, just the plain truth of what they had chosen to do and why it had mattered. She did not say anything out loud. The saying had already been done, in conference rooms, on phone calls, in signatures on documents that now carried Sauter's name and Pemberton's name and the Army Special Operations Commander's name alongside hers. What remained now was the doing. In 30 days, the first planning session for the program would convene. In 90 days, the first cohort of candidates would arrive, young, skilled, confident, in the particular way that people are confident when they've been told repeatedly that they're already excellent. She was going to dismantle that carefully and rebuild it into something more accurate. The understanding that the sequence is the last thing, that everything before it, the mathematics, the patience, the discipline of reading conditions without shortcuts, was what actually determined whether people came home. She was going to do that for Yusuf and Carmen. She was going to do it for Dev Arcila, who had already submitted his application. She was going to do it for every person who would one day be moving through dangerous ground with degraded communications and bad intelligence overhead, who would look up at an elevated position and need to find someone there who understood not just the mechanics of the shot, but the full weight of what it meant to take it. She picked up the rifle case. She walked off the range. She drove back to base. There was a planning document on her desk that needed another 4 hours of work. She had 29 days to get it exactly right, and she intended to get it exactly right, because precision was not a preference for Simone Crain. It was the standard she had set for herself at 22 years old. Alone on a high desert range in New Mexico, with borrowed equipment and a ballistics textbook, with the absolute and unshakable conviction that accuracy was not something the world gave you. It was something you built, one shot at a time, until the day someone finally gave you a room in which to teach it. That day had come.